In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
Albigensianism, a heresy that flourished in the south of France in the 12th and 13th century, was a revival of Manichaeism and part of the Catharist movement, which name it often bears. It taught the usual dualism, namely that there are two opposing principles, one good and the other evil, which created the spiritual and the material worlds respectively. All flesh is in itself evil, all spirit is good. Consequently, our Lord did not have a real human body, and his earthly life was merely an appearance, and there could be no resurrection of the body. They rejected the sacraments, especially marriage, which was forbidden to their initiates called the perfect, among whom suicide was encouraged. The ordinary believers were simply so-called by their morality was as loose as that of the perfect was strict. Initiation by the rite called consolatium, frequently administered at death. That was the definition of Albigensianism from the Catholic Dictionary.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
All right, welcome everybody. This is the Abercast. I'm your home slice, John Towers. This is we made it through moving day. The moving day project is finally over. It's at its end. Thank God. We only lost Google Play. out of all of the podcast catchers, the only one that I had problems with, ironically, it's not set up to be very user friendly, was Google Play. But we're back. So we lost some subscribers. I hope they found us back. Welcome back, Google Play subscribers. I want to encourage everyone to check out the brand newly redesigned stigmatastudios.com. There's Abercast got its own little section on there, but there's also some comic book stuff too. So check that out. It's a work in progress. Also, please consider supporting the show, rating and reviewing it on whatever podcast catcher you listen to, especially iTunes out there, everybody. And something else. Oh, Patreon. Patreon.com/Abercast. There's already a shitload of bonus audio up there. And if you guys are fans of Marvel, I just did a thing I did 3 hours on the original Infinity Gauntlet comic storyline. And you can find 2 of the hours there. You got 1 hour for free, you motherfuckers. So before I get all into this, we got a great episode. This is actually a casualty of moving day, as I was going through and I found a missing episode. So I was like, well, God damn it, we gotta go, and I gotta do another Albigensian Crusade episode because I somehow lost the original one. So this one's gonna be way better anyways. But before we get into the Crusades, I want to recognize the passing. Everybody knows I lost my cat. I'm still all wound up about that. I was posting pictures of her little resting place on Instagram last night, so if you want to... but also, wrestling legend Bruno Sammartino, rest in peace to him, and Gunny Arlie Ermy. If you have ever watched Full Metal Jacket and you've ever repeated the line, I will gouge out your eyes and skull fuck you, he's the guy that said that. So, part of the moving day thing is I went through and I reorganized all the old episodes. I edited them to make them more listener friendly than they were. So, they are there. So if you guys have a favorite you want to revisit, now is the fucking time to do it. But yeah, let's get into this. We got this bloody crusade. It's the Albigensian Crusade, or the Cathar Crusade, it's also called. Oh, hold on. Okay. So what was it? Was a military crusade, or a military campaign that lasted for about 20 years, from 1209 to 1229. It was started by this guy named Pope Innocent III. And his idea was he wanted to eradicate Catharism in the region of southern France. It's this region called the Languedoc. So these Cathars, or these Albigensians, they're called Albigensians because of around this area there was a city called Albi. So that's where the name Albigensian comes from. So these Cathars were Gnostics, and we just got done talking about the Gnostics in depth a couple episodes ago. We did a whole, I think, 5 or 6 episodes on Gnosticism. But so by the 3rd or maybe the 4th century, Gnosticism had been defeated. In 682, Caliph Omar had already torched the Library of Alexandria. He had this famous quote where he's like, we're gonna get rid of all these books, all this knowledge, we don't need that shit. So he had this famous quote where he goes, if all of these books support the Quran, then we don't need them. And if these books don't support the Quran, fuck them too. So that was his ideology from burning down the library at Alexandria, and huge swaths of Western mystery schools and religions were lost to history. And this Gnosticism problem for the Catholic Church is a gift that keeps on giving, because it keeps boomeranging back. Even to this day, you'll hear these orthodoxy apologists or Catholic apologists. They'll say, like, we've dealt with the problem of we've dealt with the heresy of Gnosticism, and it being in these movies and it having such a gigantic aspect on pop culture nowadays is just ludicrous, and we cannot let it get back in. We've already defeated this. Yep, that's right. The Arabs defeated it, the Catholics defeated it, but when you hear these apologists talk about it, they're not saying that they defeated it in the arena of ideas. We'll actually see part of the problem that Innocent III has here, and his predecessor before him, I'm sure. Part of the problem they had was they would send bishops down there to debate and talk to these Gnostics, and in many cases, they would wind up converting. And the church, for many reasons, we're going to get into the many reasons, they just could not have it. So, when these apologists say, well, we've already dealt with the problem of Gnosticism, it wasn't in the realm of ideas, or was not in the realm of theology, or just what makes sense. And hey, by the way, pretending to eat your dead God is a pretty weird fucking thing to do anyways. But instead, what they did is they turned their swords on the Gnostics, and they tackled it the same way that the Catholic Church back in the day took care of a lot of their problems. They put them to the sword, put them all to the sword. So, so when you hear, I'm not going to call out any names, but when you hear these orthodoxy apologists and stuff talking about, Gnosticism's already been defeated. We've already took care of that problem. They're not being intellectually honest, because they might have dealt with the problem, but they dealt with the problem with swords. So what is a Cathar? So there's a set of beliefs. Now, you can't really go like, oh, well, this is what Gnostics think. The Gnostics have a lot of different things. And even in that Catholic dictionary that I read at the opening of the show, they said that, hey, man, sometimes, they live life pretty, in a pretty libertine fashion. In other ways, they live life pretty strict. So, okay, so if you're a Cathar, you're a dualist, you have two opposing gods, a good god and a bad god, and the bad god is the god of the material world, the demiurge, the demiurgos, and the good god is the, the god of the wholeness beyond the pleroma, the home of Sophia. And other things, these Cathars were vegetarians. They wouldn't eat anything produced by sex because sex is evil. So part of the problem with sex is that when you have a child, you're trapping this divine, this spark of infinity. You're trapping it in this, crude matter. Like, it's like what Yoda would say, we're not made of this crude matter. We're these infinity sparks, this divine and sacred soul just happen to be stuck in a meat robot. So these Cathars were pretty big deals. They built churches, they built castles and strongholds. One of this thing about this flesh material world problem that they had is, and this turned into part of the giant part of their heresy was they were like, well, if Jesus was God, he couldn't have been material because material is bad. He couldn't have been made flesh. And it follows along that if he was not made flesh, then, he couldn't have died on the cross and he couldn't have been resurrected. So that became a huge part of the heresy. However, there's also a practical problem that the Catholic Church did not like the Gnostics, and the Gnostic Cathars or the Gnostic Albigensians. One of the other things they thought was that gender was equal. I almost said all gender was equal, and that's pretty funny. Both genders are equal. Besides the perfects, they had like a round robin style clergy duties. Another part of their shtick was that their relationship with God was a personal relationship. They didn't need confession, and they didn't do confession, and they didn't need it. And they didn't really need a priest. Their deal was their inner knowledge, their self-knowledge, the knowledge of their own equals their salvation. You pray yourself and you confess to God by yourself, not through an intermediary like a priest. And probably the most important feature of this Catharism, probably what sealed their fate, was they did not give tithings. They did not collect tithings, and they did not give tithings to the church. So we are going to see how that becomes a problem as they as the shitstorm kicks off. So the Catholics saw Catharism as a heresy of the highest order, as we read in the thing. Here, I'm going to consult another book here. We're going to talk about the Encyclopedia of Heresies and Heretics, one of the old favorites here. I'm sure I have a bookmark in here. Okay, so there's quite literally a huge section in here, so I'm just picking out something here. The clerical attack on the Albigensians. Innocent III, who later called for a crusade to destroy the heretics of the Languedoc, was elected pope in 1198 at the age of 37. His reign was considered the papacy's high point in terms of temporal power. So what he did is when he got in there, he brought the European royalty to heel. He started using excommunication as a weapon of social engineering. Pope Innocent ordered a group of Cistercian monks to preach in Languedoc, to set up inquiries into the prevalence of the heresies, and to stiffen the reform of the clergy. This mission had mixed results. Although the authorities in the city of Toulouse promised to seek out and persecute the heretics, and although Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, one of the most powerful aristocrats in the area, returned to the fold for a time, most of the Cathars and their sympathizers ignored these Cistercian preachings. The Pope decided that a stronger weapon was needed after the Spanish clerics, Diego de Azevedo, Bishop of Usoma, and Dominic de Guzman, toured the area and declared that only preachers who equaled the Cathar perfects in their aesthetic and pure lives could influence the heretics. But Dominic observed that the papal legates sent by Innocent, headed by Peter de Castelnau and Arnold Armory, we're going to talk more about these dudes later. Citrau, traveled like princes. Dominic and the Bishop of Usama preached against the Albigensians throughout the province and found an institute for poor girls to secure them from the heretics' influence. Although they were credited with various miracles, they were unable to win back the area. I mean, think about it. If you had, if you were a rich guy, if you were a noble person, wouldn't you? I mean, it seems like I wouldn't want to pay the tithings to the Catholic Church either. I would be like, yeah, these Cathars can hang out on my land. That's fine. And return to Catholic control. After the subsequent crusade, Dominic would go on to form the Dominican Order of Monks in Toulouse. Another thing that happened after this crusade was the launch of the Inquisition, which led to a giant shit stain on history. For their own reasons, many of the southern nobles continued to favor the heretics. Raymond of Toulouse exasperated the papal legates until he was excommunicated in 1207. The following January, he summoned Peter de Castanau under the pretext of agreeing to reject the heretics, but the two parted angrily on his way eastward. So this tithing issue was important because not only did it not support the church, it attracted nobles and royalties who was stuck supporting and sending money to Rome. You know, their point of view probably was just like, you mean I don't have to pay you guys? So we already kind of talked about this. In 1194, Lautaro di Conti was elected pope, and he took the name of Innocent III. He became probably one of the most powerful popes in history. Some of the things that he did is he launched a crusade against Muslim Spain. He launched a crusade to Jerusalem through Egypt, and the Crusaders actually wound up sacking Constantinople, which was hilarious. This was a disastrous fourth crusade. He wound up annulling the Magna Carta, which was responsible for launching the first Barons' War, and ultimately, what we are gathered to talk about this evening is to talk about the Albigensian Crusade, which will lead directly to, like I said, the shit stain on history that is known as the Inquisition. So just like from the entry in the Encyclopedia of Heresies and Heretics, Innocent III starts placing aggressive bishops and clergy into the Cathar regions to, in an attempt to cover or convert these heretics. He sends representatives down there to investigate and convert, but there's a guy, this powerful Count Raymond VI, the Count of Toulouse, who openly supports these Cathars. He didn't offer support to the legates from Rome and even went so far as to not allow them on his land, the land where the Cathars were living. Raymond was eventually excommunicated when an edict was placed on his lands. Innocent had a papal legate named Pierre de Castanau with a group of these white monks from the Cistercian order. On January 14th, 2008, Pierre de Castanau was murdered. Innocent III blamed the Cathars, and he used this as a reason to launch the Albigensian Crusade. No one actually knew why he got murdered. There was a rumor at the time saying that he was murdered by a overzealous squire that had evil intentions in his heart. Or this squire killed Castanau, and the reason was he was trying to impress this Count Raymond, the Count of Toulouse. So he goes to he launches this crusade. When Pope Innocent III, this is back to the book, the Encyclopedia of Heresies and Heretics. When Pope Innocent III ordered his crusade against the heretics, crusading had been a way of life for Western European knights and their followers for a full century. Ever since the First Crusade in 1095 to 1099 had captured Jerusalem. Now this is when Geoffrey de Bouillon took Jerusalem and became the king of Jerusalem, the protector of Christendom. We did that episode. You might want to refer back to it. Had captured Jerusalem, but although the Crusaders holding in Palestine and Syria were eventually retaken by Muslim armies, the Albigensian Crusade provided a permanent military victory. So who gets put in charge of something like this? Who does Innocent find to run a war against fellow countrymen? He gets this guy named Simon de Montfort, who is the 5th Earl of Leicester. He participated in the Crusades in 1199, and they call it taking the cross. He took the cross for the 4th Crusade. Innocent III specifically told the Crusaders not to attack fellow Christians, and eventually they wound up sacking Constantinople. I mentioned that before. This is the disastrous 4th Crusade. But Simon de Montfort, everyone was like, oh, he's got the high moral ground because he left before the shenanigans about killing fellow Christians popped up. But don't let that fool you. This guy was a monster. I'm not going to skip too far ahead, but later in the Crusade, in 1210, he oversees the burning death of 140 Cathars in a village of Minerva, who refused to recant. He took prisoners from Bram, and he cut their lips. Listen to this. He cut their lips, their noses, their ears off, and he gouged out all of their eyes except for one eye of one fucking guy. And that guy was the leader. And he led all the prisoners into the town of Les Tours as a warning to the Cathars that they were coming. Imagine that. You're just sitting in your little town, mind your own business, and in comes this train of human beings with their lips, their ears cut off, their noses cut off, and they're all but one eye gouged out. That's fucking crazy. This guy is a machine. He's a nightmare. So, we're going to go back to the book here real quick. The crusade entailed more than one campaign, and it waxed and waned for 16 years, not counting subsequent short-lived rebellions. Excuse me. Which cities and castles changing hands, local lords changing sides, and the full spectrum of senseless cruelties that warfare can produce, especially when motivated by religious dogmas. The Crusade's most infamous anecdote comes from the chronicler Caesarius of Histerbach, 1220 to 1235. He was a Cistercian monk. When the Crusaders laid siege to the city of Bizet, they later captured it. Some of them approached the Crusade's spiritual leader, Arnold Amory. So this Simon de Montfort went to the head the head clerical functionary that was with the Crusades. And Simon says, how should we deal with the population? It's a mix of Catholics and heretics. So basically he's like, look, man, in this city, there's Cathars and Catholics. And we don't know how do we tell them apart? And this godly man says to have replied something like, kill them all. God will know his own. Which is crazy. This is, the Metallica. This is kill them all. Let God sort them out. Arnold did later write the Pope Innocent III, describing how the Crusaders had killed all the men, women, and children found in the city, perhaps 15 to 20,000 people. The Pope wound up congratulating him, saying that God had permitted the faithful to earn their salvation, even though they had been exterminated. The religious motivations of the war was perhaps most visible in the first years, at the capture of the city of Minerva. In 1210, we just talked about this. Three perfects returned to the Catholic Church, but 140 were burned, many leaping voluntarily into the flames, saying, "Why preach to us?" one of them asked Arnold Amory. "We care nothing for your faith. We deny the Church of Rome." In the same year, during the siege of Termes, the Archdeacon of Paris organized a religious confraternity among the camp of followers and non-combatants to gather stones for the Crusaders' catapults. When the fortified town of Lavar fell, 90 southern knights were killed, and their leader's Cathar's sister was thrown alive into a well. Between 300 and 400 other heretics were burned outside the towns and walls. Similar tales abound. The most notable crusader was Simon de Montfort, which I have already introduced you to. He led a small but active army from one corner of the Languedoc to the other, besieging towns, destroying mills, houses, orchards, and vineyards, and keeping a constant pressure on the heretics and their noble patrons and sympathizers. By 1212, he had conquered enough territory to hold a parliament which formulated procedures from which heretics would be delivered to the church and their property confiscated. Southern opposition formed around the Count of Toulouse, all of whom bore the name Raymond. Raymond the Sixth and Raymond the Seventh, which was his son, also named Raymond, who apparently ordered and encouraged the murder of papal legates in 1208 and stood off Simon de Montfort's army during the 9-month siege in 1216. His son, Raymond VII, which I just talked about, was in turn excommunicated in 1220, for persecuting the clergy, but he would live to make peace in 1226 with King Louis VIII of France, who led the Crusaders after Simon de Montfort's death during the siege of Toulouse. By the time... Well, hold on, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. No. So this is how it went for the Cathars. For like 2 decades. Eventually, some French nobles set up a resistance, and this was the Count of Toulouse, which we were just talking about. Okay, hold on. I need a refresher here. I'm gonna jump books. I'm gonna jump books to a book called The Cathars, the most successful heresy of the Middle Ages. This is written by Sean Martin. He sheds a little bit of light. He gets a little bit of context about Raymond the Count of Toulouse. He says the most powerful of them all was Raymond VI, the Count of Toulouse. His court was a kaleidoscopic mix of Catholic, Cathar, and Jews, entertained by troubadours and jongleurs. His friend Stephen O'Shea notes, we were not distinguished for their piety. Raymond had inherited his title in 1194 from his father, Raymond V. So it's a long line of counts of Toulouse named Raymond. His parents seem to have been on the opposite sides of the fence in the matter of faith. Raymond's mother, Constance, had been present at the Lombers in 1165 when the Cathars had faced down their Catholic opponents, while his father had invaded a group of that makes more sense. His father had invited a group of churchmen to investigate the heresy situation in his lands in 1177. They came, they saw, and promptly concluded that eradicating Catharism from the Languedoc was an impossible task that went home as soon as possible. The one man whom they did manage to convince was sent to Jerusalem as penance. Okay, so we're going to see that as well, that when these Cathars are down and the rare one does recant and gets put back in the fold of Catholicism, they get shitty jobs like this. They get shipped to Jerusalem to man a wall somewhere because they had the intestinal fortitude, they had the nerve to be a heretic against these Catholics. Oh fuck, where am I at? When he got back to Toulouse, far from having his tail between his legs, he was given a hero's welcome and was promptly given a well-paid job. This pretty much summed up things, as Saint Bernard had found to his cost. The Languedoc was indeed a land of many heresies, and respect for the church was about as low as it could possibly be. The church during Raymond VI's early years as a Count of Toulouse unfortunately deserved everything it got. The clergy were deeply unpopular and were conspicuously indulgent. It doesn't say this, but they were very corrupt. And there were churches where Mass had not been said in years. Well, why say Mass if no one's coming to listen to it? I'd rather, had not been said in years. The locals use the phrase, I'd rather be a priest, when asked to do something that they would rather not. The Bishop of Toulouse was a classic case in point. Raymond of Rabbitzen was a galloping financial liability. His main claim to fame seems to have been mortgaging church property in order to conduct a private war against his own vassals, done with the aid of mercenaries hired for the occasion. Raymond duly bankrupted the diocese and was replaced with a more able Fulk of Marseilles, who had been a former troubadour and was thought to be the only man who could handle the hornet's nest of the Languedoc. Such was the dire state of the Diocesian? I don't know what that... I know it's plural for Diocenes. Finances. When Fulk took over, he did not dare send his mules to the well for water, lest they be repossessed. The moribund state of the church was not helped by the constant interference from nobility. The activities of the Trencavels, rivals to Raymond VI's family, and the St. Giles are cases in point. In 1178, they had the Bishop of Albi arrested on trumped-up charges and thrown into jail. When the following year they forced an enormous sum of money out of the coffers of the monasteries at St. Pons de Thormes in 1197. So really, I guess what they're saying is that this was rife with political problems in the area. All right, back to this book, The Cathars, the most successful heresy of the Middle Ages. The Siege of Toulouse. When Toulouse heard the news, there was an uproar. The Toulousians were determined to keep de Montfort out of the city. He was, after all, universally hated. Resistance was compounded by the unexpected military victory of the younger Raymond, who took the Crusader-held towns of Beaucaire. Then Innocent died unexpectedly in July 1216. It seemed, though, things might be turning in the favor of the South. Simon de Montfort's reaction was to hit Toulouse and hit it hard. It's amazing how many people you find that really have a high opinion of Simon de Montfort. When doing research for the show, I found quite a number of books that put this guy on a pedestal and quite a number of researchers who really admire this guy. And to me, it's just crazy. Like, I don't understand. Like, like, he's just running around killing hippies, literally killing literal hippies with swords. New Age hippies. Simon de Montfort to hit Toulouse and hit it hard, and he aided by the most charming of men, Fulk of Toulouse, who persuaded the city's dignitaries to discuss terms outside of the city walls. Either Fulk was remarkably convincing, or the city fathers remarkably forgetful of what had just happened to Raymond Roger Tenkevel at the Carcassonne. But they took the bait and they left the safety of their city and were promptly put in chains as soon as they reached Simon's camp. With no one left to coordinate its defense, Toulouse fell almost immediately to the Crusaders, who spent a month sacking the city. And to cap it all, Simon imposed exorbitant taxes on the beleaguered Toulousians. At that moment of what was potentially his finest hour, Simon made a fatal mistake. Despite the fact that Arnold Armory had recently excommunicated him for his bullying tactics at Narbonne, Simon blithely disregarded the excommunication and left Toulouse to harass the nobles of Provence, leaving a garrison to hold the city of Toulousians. Immediately began to build up weapons secretly and devised a plan to revolt against the most hated of men. On 13 September 1217, Raymond VI re-entered the city under cover of dawn mists, and the populace was ecstatic. Despite the fact that Raymond was almost notoriously bad military commander, at the Battle of Muret, he had famously done nothing. He sounds like a Kennedy. The Toulousians felt the salvation was at hand, and Raymond immediately ordered the rebuilding of the city's defenses. Simon's garrison was terminated with extreme prejudice. That means they killed them all. When he heard the news, Simon rushed back to Toulouse, intent on atrocity, which is his M.O. We've talked about it. It's what he does really well. I didn't mean to say really well. I don't know what that is. I don't know why I said it like it's really well. I sound like a millennial. When he heard the news, Simon rushed back to Toulouse, intent on atrocity. Much to his surprise, he was thwarted time and time again, despite the arrival of reinforcements from the north. Simon's forces could not breach the city walls, and the stalemate lasted 9 months. Until June 1218, when the Crusaders decided somewhat belatedly to employ siege engines against the walls of Toulouse. On 25 June, during the defense of the siege engineers, Simon de Montfort's head was destroyed by a stone launched from a catapult on the wall of Toulouse. I hadn't read that before. That's great. His head was destroyed. What a funny way to write that. Who wrote this? Sean Martin. Good stuff. His head was destroyed by a stone. According to tradition, the catapult was operated by women and girls. The most hated man in the Languedoc was dead. No revenge was ever sweeter. So Simon de Montfort dies, and there seems to be like a changing of the guard in the Cathars, the most successful heresy of the Middle Ages. He writes, Simon de Montfort's death heralded not only the end of one of the darkest eras in the West since the Viking raids, but also a period of change that saw the old figures die off. So Innocent passed away. Simon de Montfort passed away. Dominic Guzman died in 1221. He would later be... in 1234, he would be canonized as Saint Dominic, the founder of the Dominican order. Raymond VI dies in 1222. King Philip Augustus of France died in 1223, in the same year as Raymond Roger of Foy, who remained unrepentant and went to his grave wishing he'd killed more Crusaders. That dude's heavy metal. It's heavy metal. So eventually there was a peace. Peace was waged, and the crusade came to an end. But what had happened, so because there were still so many Cathars out there, and they were so unrepentant, and they were so just not down with these Catholics. Instead, Pope Gregory IV, who was the new pope, he establishes the Inquisition, and the mission statement was to find and uproot heretical movements. And they focused on the Cathars, and they forced the Cathars to repent and convert. The only other option was to go underground and become a secret Gnostic, which is, if you listen to some of my Freemason episodes, I think that you might agree. Well, that's definitely what I think. There are these secret underground Gnostic movements out there. So he starts the Inquisition, and the Cathars by Sean Martin, with French troops reduced in the Languedoc and the sort of barren wasteland we might more readily associate with Arthurian myth or the nightmare of Bosch and Bruegel. A nightmare of another sort was being planned in the Laternian Palace. Pope Horrenus had died in 1227 and was succeeded by Gregory IV. Okay, so the Gregory IV wasn't Innocent's replacement. He was Innocent's replacement. Who was very much an activist pope. As his great forebearer, Gregory the Seventh and Innocent the Third had been, Gregory born Eugulio di Conte di Segni, these Italians, was one of Innocent's nephews. Yeah, he has the name de Conte, so I knew that they were related somehow. Gregory realized that if the Cathars were to be effectively destroyed, then the church needed the tools to pursue individuals as much as, and perhaps even more than, the ability to intervene militarily. So this guy, Gregory, was like, we're going about this all wrong. By sending armies out there, we're begging for resistance. Our strength invites the challenge. So instead of seeing it as a military issue, let's kind of take it as a one-on-one, sort of like a police issue. This is like the reverse problem the Clintons had with the problem of terrorism that became 9/11. The Inquisition was based on procedures drawn up under Innocent to tackle wayward priests, which gave inquisitors, usually Dominican friars, the powers of arrest and trial. They started as a method for keeping the clergy in line, was to become one of the most effective means of thought control that Europe has ever known. The Rhineland, the haunt of the earliest known Cathars in 1143, was to receive the attention of the first inquisitor, Conrad of Marburg. Conrad was an extreme ascetic who brought a campaign of terror to the Rhinelands with his two henchmen, Conrad Tors, a Dominican, and a one-eyed, one-handed layman called John. Almost everywhere they went, they found heretics of all denominations, due to a combination of his own blinkered zealotry and ignorance of what actually constituted Cathar belief. Conrad thought that he had unearthed a heresy that he dubbed Luciferianism. No doubt he remembered or had it pointed out to him that Cathar meant someone who indulged in satanic rites, which included obscene kisses on the rear ends of cats. Or we'll also see goats, as we talk in the Masonic episodes, or also even the Goat of Mendes episode. The sabbatical, Baphomet, the sabbatical goat of Mendes. Such beliefs were not new. Exactly the same accusation, minus the cat, had been leveled at Orleans, Heresies in 1022. Conrad relayed his findings to Gregory, who promptly issued the bull Vox in Romana in June 1233, denouncing the Luciferianisms. Conrad's procedure, if it could be called that, was swift and brutal. If the unfortunates whom the trio apprehended were judged guilty, they were burnt the same day without further inquiries taking place. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of innocent people, most of them simple, unlettered believers, met their deaths. In amongst them were a small percentage of Cathars. The level of hatred Conrad generated was astounding. He achieved a notoriety of de Montfort-esque proportions within months. He went a step too far, however, when he accused Count Henry II of seeing of heresy. Count Henry demanded the right to a fair trial, and Conrad's case against the Count collapsed when it became apparent that the witnesses Conrad had called were among Henry's enemies, and the Archbishop of Trier and Mainz wrote to Gregory complaining about Conrad's behavior. Conrad reacted by promptly calling for a crusade against Henry and his supporters. All right, so eventually the Inquisition was turned to Languedoc, and what I'm actually running very long. The Inquisition was turned to Languedoc. And so a lot of these Cathar perfects that were still in the Languedoc, they fell back to this fortress that the Cathars had built called Mont Segur. And inside Mount Segur, these Cathar perfects held out. Now remember, the Inquisition was not a military force, so they had to rely on soldiers of the surrounding areas to do like their soldiering for them. You know, this one-handed, one-eyed John character isn't going to be much help in a siege. You know what I mean? But so it all eventually comes to an end at a Cathar fortress called Montsegur in 1244. For 10 months, Montsegur was besieged. Oh, Jesus. Montsegur. I just sneezed. I just had a gigantic sneeze and my fucking soul was trying to get out. They, the Cathars, were promised to be able to live if they recanted, and not one of them did. And on March 16th, 1244, the soldiers rounded up 214 Cathar prefects and torched them. The place is actually still now called Pare des Cremats, which means the field of the burned. Back to this book from Sean Martin. For the perfect, I was calling it a prefect, but it's perfect, I guess. It was no choice at all. Not one of their 200 strong number, the number that I found was 214. Just, you know, full disclosure, like 14 fucking doomed people. Not one of their 200 strong number was willing to recant. They spent 2 weeks of the truce distributing their goods to their families and followers. Peter Roger was given 50 doublets, and the perfect had made to sell or give away as he saw fit. The atmosphere inside the castle during this period must have been indescribable. A sorrow touched with a joy in knowing that for the perfect, their journey through the veil of tears that was the material world would soon be over. And on the final Sunday of the truce, 21 believers, some of whom originally gone to Montsegur merely as mercenaries to help Peter Roger defend the castle, and all of whom they had the option of going free, asked to be given consolidentium, and they knew that in doing so they were giving themselves up to the pyres already being built. That was at the foot of the mountain. If there was anything in the entire history of Catharism that illustrates the appeal and power of the faith, it is this extraordinary moment. All of them were consoled. So what they're saying is there's a group of fighting men that when these Cathars were locking themselves up because they knew the Inquisition was coming, there's a group of fighting men that went with them just to help them fight the church. Do you understand how crazy that is? In doing so, they realized that when it was over, they were giving themselves over to the pyre. At first light on Wednesday, 16 March 1244, Montsegur was evacuated. Peter Roger and his knights and their families went free, watching as the perfect was lashed together on the pyres, and they were from all walks of life. Corba of Perel and her daughter, I can't even fucking pronounce this, Escalarmonde were nobles, as well as being Raymond of Perel's wife and daughter, and William Garnier was, if not a peasant, certainly a man of humbler means than the Parcellis. The 21 last-minute converts were also among the number, as were Bernard Marty and Raymond Ulagar, Hugh of Acris, and Peter Amel, the Archbishop of Narbonne, looked on as the pyres were lit. And the site of the burnings is still known to this day as the Fields of the Cremated. Jesus. Fuck, man. Side note. Epilogue. The Inquisition was founded by the French monarchy. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot I wrote this. The Inquisition was funded by the French monarchy until 1290s, when Philip the Fair restricted funding. It was Philip who broke, and he could never pay his debt, a debt he owed to the Knights Templar, which was why Philip hatched the plot to destroy them in 1307. Well, that, and they were secretly Muslims, as we know from the Baphomet episode. Ironically, the Templars would suffer the same fate as these Cathars from Montsegur. They'd be tortured, turned, lashed to bundles of lumber, and lit on fire like a goddamned birthday cake. I don't know. All right. This has been the Abercast. I'm John Towers. Please check out the newly redesigned website, stigmatastudios.com. There's a Abercast page right there. You can see all the new and shiny ways to listen to the show. Want to tell you guys that if you go to my YouTube page, my new host automatically converts episodes to YouTube. So if you dig listening to YouTube or watching YouTube during the day or whatever, if that's your preferred method of getting podcasts, then it's all there. All the episodes that are currently on iTunes or whatever are there. So it's a great thing, because it used to take me quite a long time to produce videos when I tried to do them. So it's a great, fun way to catch the show. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. We're submitted to Spotify and iHeartRadio. I'm not sure. Spreaker is also a great place to get the show, and iTunes. There's a ton of bonus content on the Patreon page, as well as on the Patreon page. I got some great stuff, swag I'm giving out. The first wave is some bookmarks with the Abercast Oath. We got some mason jars with the Oath coming out, and some t-shirts also. If the Patreon thing seems to work out. And also my first goal, and you guys, if you're longtime listeners, you know, my first goal is to get a Books for Soldiers program going. And I think I only set it to like $100 or $200 a month. So if we could get that, we could pay for books, resources, shipping, and the P.O. boxes and stuff that we need to do that. So Patreon.com. I want us to get something together that we could do as a community to do like this Books for Soldiers logistics. So I thought that this would be a great way to do it. And it's the only goal that I have right now is just to do this thing. So let's make it happen with your help. And I thank you guys for your support. Also, remember, another great way to support is rate and review on iTunes. This is John Towers. This has been the Abercast, and we just did a great episode on the Albigensian Crusade. We could probably touch back and do an episode just on the Inquisition, because it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's nightmarish, and it actually happened. So, maybe we could circle back and do that. We just did the part 1 of the Infinity Gauntlet. You can find part 2 and 3. It's like 3 hours of Infinity Gauntlet talk. You can find the other 2 episodes on Patreon for a paltry sum.
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm come face to face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
But, yeah, so there you go. Rest in peace, Bruno, San Martino, and Gunny. Rest in peace to you guys. Rest in peace to my little cat that's buried in the backyard. God damn it. And I gotta go cook. I cooked the biggest fucking fattest steak I've ever seen in my life last night. I posted pictures of it on Instagram. Oh, that's another thing. Find all my social media links at the bottom of the website, stigmatastudios.com. Find me. Reach out to me. Say hi. And all that stuff. And also, while I was recording this episode, I was also recording to Instagram stories. So if you want to see, my process and my ugly mug, there's 2 quick videos, but you got to catch them. I think they're only there for 24 hours. So anyhow, thank you guys. And the featured song for this evening, I think it's going to be my default song. It's "Fucking Fight" by Soda Jerk. The Jerks. I feel like I'm forgetting to say something, but I'm not. So bye. Have a great week, everybody. Great week.
Well, I was just 14 when I had my first sip. In my darling whiskey, she tightened up her grip, and she made me sick that night. I knew that the whiskey would take up my life. Well, I stand a fool 2 inches below 5'9", and every guy here wants to take me alive. So I'll take a shot of whiskey and punch out the lights. The whiskey, it makes me wanna fucking fight. It makes me wanna fucking fight. Will everyone here up in this place? Not even the crack of dawn is safe. So I'll take a shot of whiskey and say goodnight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. I fucking fight, fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.